Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. Welcome back to another episode of the Islamophobia Files, where we expose, interrogate, and challenge the structure that produce and sustain anti-Muslim racism across the world. Islamophobia is not about individual attitude and perspective, but is actually a structural element that we are dealing with and confronting. Today, we're diving deep into intersectional Islamophobia, a form of discrimination that does not act alone. It intersects with gender, race, class, disability, migration status, and so many facets of identity. Muslim women, in general, tend to be the primary targets of Islamophobia, especially in public space. Black Muslims confronting anti-Black racism inside and outside Muslim communities, converts navigating belonging, and a whole host of other identities, including Muslims in professional settings where their identity as Muslims is constantly negated, challenged, and demonized. Now, each of these experiences reveal another layer of how Islamophobia operates. Today, we're honored to be joined by two brilliant thinkers and activists. First, we're going to have with us Nuha Waikat-Shaer, assistant professor, faculty of social work at Wilfrid Laurier University in Canada, up to the north. Hopefully, it's not going to be the 51st state. Her work and advocacy for social justice and community resilience adds an important dimension. Also, being Palestinian, coming and working in settings like Canada, have multi-layered challenges, both Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism. So today we'll explore how resistance is built from the ground up and how centering complexities, not erasing it, creates new pathways for healing and social transformations. So welcome to the conversation, Nuha. So maybe you could give us an early introduction to what do you mean by intersectionality, and as it relates to you as a Palestinian working in Canada, and the challenges that now can come into the discussion about Islamophobia.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hatem. Thank you for having me today, and I'm really honored to speak to your audience and to engage in such an important conversation. For me, intersectionality, it just all these different aspects of my identity as a Palestinian, which is I like to always put it first. Palestinian woman, mother, scholar, witness of settler colonialism and settler violence on Turtle Island, maybe survivor of settler colonialism in Palestine. English is not my first language. Engaging or immersing myself in a new culture that's totally different from my own culture, is all of these together how they shape my lived experience here in Canada, how it shaped how I interact with my family, with my community, as well as how I present myself as a scholar, as how I position myself in the classroom, in the research that I do, and in the activism as well. All these together, you cannot. So my work and my lived experience are aligned. They are the same. My research is who I am. And my even when I teach in the classroom, I like it's me. I'm teaching live, giving examples from my lived experience to explain such the concept that this, academic concept of intersectionality and how it shaped every aspect of our lives here within the academic context on Turtle Island.
Now, you actually began your career as an architect in Palestine, and then migrating and arriving into North America. So how is that transition, both being an architect, but then also working in spaces, academic spaces, how is that transition?
Yeah, think that's a question I've been always asked. People see this transition, if they see it as transition, or my journey from architecture to social work. So I studied, as you mentioned, architecture in Nablus city at Al-Najah University, and I did that just with the time when the Palestinian, after Oslo directly, that when I started my university, and I graduated with an architectural degree in architecture. And what brought me to study architecture was maybe my background. I'm one of 8 siblings. We lived in a small village called Balat al-Balad, close to Balata camp, and where's so-called Joseph Tomb, where settlers attacked. So I witnessed that since my early childhood. And we lived in a 1-bedroom home. That was our home, with a kitchen, small kitchen. So space like that 1-bedroom was a home, was a place where we study, where we do everything. And that space also been it created extra stress by living under the occupation, under the Israeli occupation, where you are stuck inside, especially during curfews, when the settlers used to come to attack our little village. So all of that brought me to think deeply about space and what does space mean, and how we use space as a place for protection, and also sometimes space could be a place of oppression at the same time. So that brought me in the first place to study architecture. But after I graduated, I found myself just designing fancy homes, especially with the Oslo era, for people who have, but not really what it meant for me as a space, what the space meant for me as a human being. So how I see, for me, it was not a departure from architecture to social work, but more a deepening. As an architect, I was to understand how space shapes human life. In Palestine, also, I saw this power weaponized through domicide, which we, what's like a domicide's a term coined in the early 2000, and it referred to the deliberate destruction of home to cause harm. So I witnessed and I saw how these, either through bulldozering homes, demolishing homes, and by confining or trapping us within our spaces where we cannot move as well. So for me, it made me deeply think of this how spaces are created and made in Palestine, and how it's being used as a geopolitical control. Therefore, my research became about reading the landscape of power. Instead of looking at the physical space, I deepening my work to look at the landscape of power, from the bulldozering of homes in the West Bank and in Gaza, to the invisible architecture of exclusion in our own institutions. So I study how systems of power, settler colonialism, academic and legal, are designed to erase certain voices and presences. So my work in social work is essentially architectural. It is about dismantling the structure of erasure and co-creating spaces for belonging and steadfastness, or as we call it in our Palestinian language, sumud. So that's
sumud, steadfastness.
Yes, steadfastness, and the sumud concept, which I use a lot. So so moving from designing homes and creating spaces for people to live in, to hopefully trying to create spaces where we all feel that we belong.
When we deal with Islamophobia, there's a whole element of research that deals with the geography of Islamophobia, where in general, where we could say that where Islamophobia intensifies. So increasingly in some of the research, we find that targeting Muslims, in particular Muslim women, who have at least have the hijab on, tends to be a primary site of uh, uh, violence and targeting. So how can maybe we could relate the geography of Islamophobia is also to the architecture of Islamophobia, meaning the places and how cities, areas are either welcoming or not welcoming.
Okay, thank you, Hatem. This is a very important and also very personal for me, this question in terms of the architecture of Islamophobia and how Islamophobia impact our presence in the spaces as, different spaces as women, starting from the home, going out to the street in the neighborhoods, to the supermarket, the mall, then to the university, and how people look at us, the way how people look at us with hijab, like especially as Muslim women with hijab. So for me, I have actually both worlds. Before I came, I started wearing hijab. I was a hijabi woman since I was 13. And I didn't understand what does it mean to be attacked, within within the Middle East, you are respected, you are treated as normal. Since I arrived to Canada in 2007, I struggled how people looked at me. But I kept, I sustained my presence and how especially I lived in Montreal, a multicultural city, and I studied at McGill, which has a lot of international students. Then I landed in a job at Wilfrid Laurier University, where I moved with my small family to a very small white city, which is Brantford. It's just an hour south of Toronto. And this is a very white dominant area. And I started to see that the way how people been looking at me, facing like all other Muslim women with hijab, how people speak with us, even yelled at me, violence, different forms of violence. Plus that also in the classroom, how my students also, I faced that struggle, how, to stand with my hijab in front of my students, again, with my English as a second language, where I faced lots of racism and attack from students. And whenever I tried to report it or talk about it, I was made, or I felt like I am the problem. It's not Islamophobia the problem. It's not also my other aspects of my identity. Like Islam is one aspect, but the other aspect of me, Palestinian women, all of these together shaped my experience within the academy. So whenever I started to I know why. What brought me to talk about, because we always talk about EDI, and we present ourselves in social work as champions for social justice and equity, diversity, and inclusion. That encouraged me to share my experiences facing discrimination based on being a hijabi woman. All of this, as I said, I felt each time I talked about it that I am the problem. Either I am exaggerating, because gaslighting, exaggerating, I'm aggressive, I am all of these, terms that we are described, they're used to describe us as women in these spaces. And that became, I was a single mom with my 2 kids. That became very emotionally very heavy on me, in terms of I've been udit, I've been harassed because of hijab, and I know it's I'm not here going to it's like my understanding of Quran in terms of we were ordered to cover ourselves, so we had I don't want just to mess up with the Quran, but hatta la nu'dha, so we do not get harmed. So I start to think of that, especially after the killing of Afdal family in London. It's about 1 hour southern of where I live, where a family were walking in the streets and some crazy, a terrorist attacked them and killed the whole family. That just deepened the fear inside me, to the extent that, okay, the hijab was to protect me, but now I see it's becoming a source of fear and might cause harm for me and my children. And then I took the very, very hard decision to remove my hijab. And the first time I left the house, I start first putting a hat and then removing the hat. It was like going outside naked. This is removing that. So this is a very, very, like, see the violence to which extent that the violence that we face as women in these spaces, even not only the public spaces where there's people say these are ignorant people, or no, even in the academic spaces where we're supposed to work with people who claim that they are open-minded, they are calling for EDI, etc. Even like if you, I insisted to keep the last part of my identity by keeping an image on my portfolio at the university website with my hijab, because that's part of who I am, part of my identity. So I kept it. Even there's some people saying, oh, maybe you should remove it because it doesn't represent who you are now. I said, no, it's me. It's my hijab. It's a very important part of my identity. I might not face harassment like being for, hopefully nobody will attack me and my children, but at least I want to hold on to this last piece of me that I don't want to lose.
Maybe you could speak. Have you experienced the normal pattern of the pulling of the hijab from the back, speaking about it as the only way that your identity gets to be understood or interpreted?
Luckily, I didn't face that aggression in terms of somebody pulling my hijab, but verbal. Mostly it was more for me verbal aggression. For example, whenever, like, the first thing is like, one of the things that impacted me a lot, my daughter, whenever, like, she's now 13, she started to ask me when I come to school not to come to the classroom or inside, to stay a little bit. Not close, and she will come to me. And then I was just, she wanted to fit in. Because kids were saying to her, what is this? What is this?
Yeah.
And
I see that Nadia have joined us right now, so I'm going to bring her to the stage.
For sure.
So Professor Nadia Fadil. Nadia works as a associate professor at the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology at Leuven University in Belgium. Her work covers Islamophobia in Europe, the Muslim identity, Arab, North African identity across Europe, and the increasing barriers that are being placed in there. So welcome. I know that there's a strike. We can't control that. It's really good to have you with us. So we started the conversation on really the question of intersectionality and how we could actually think of intersectionality as it relates to Islamophobia. And so we began with Nuha. She was talking about her experience as a Palestinian with an architecture degree, coming to Canada and facing all the different barriers. So maybe we could actually also ask the question about how do you see intersectionality in the work that you do and as it relates to Islamophobia?
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'm very sorry for my delay, but yeah, the austerity measures have triggered a 3-day nationwide strike, which is great, but which also comes with its own set of logistical challenges. But so to answer your question, and also it's good to see you and also to meet you. The question of Islamophobia and intersectionality as it manifests itself in the European context and within my own trajectory. I think it's on the one hand being belonging, because of course Muslims in Europe are majoritarianly working class, so we are mostly coming from a working class background, which is also the case for myself and my parents having migrated in the 60s as workers, or my father has migrated as a worker in the coal mine industry. And so there is already that first element of social mobility and the kind of challenges that accompany it. And what does it mean to be a child of working class migrants and to have access to specific kind of education, schooling, where the whole idea is that, as a child of analphabetic and you could say uneducated parents, you are not expected, if you want to succeed academically. And connected to that is also the fact that the migrants that we're talking about also come from the former colonies, that characterize, you could say, the Muslim community, whether it's North Africa, West Africa for the Francophone part, or South Asia for the UK, of course. And how that also goes along with a specific kind of attitude of, well, I mean, we are your kind of superior, right? So this kind of colonial kind of logic where you will consider post-colonial migrants as people who are necessarily lesser developed or lesser evolved, and the whole paradigm of integration comes to amplify that this idea that by integration or through the process of integration you will have access to a higher civilizational kind of sketch, and connected to that is of course the kind of historical relationship to Islam, which is in the European context a quite challenging one, where Muslims are considered as outsiders, and from the moment Europe came to realize that they were also insiders, it started to panic, and this also gave rise to several narratives that will feed European Islamophobia around, you could say, infiltration, them being a fifth column, and what have you. So I think all of these different elements, and then of course you have the other, you could say, sociological aspects, gender, and all these different elements that of course also play into how it gets manifested, with the woman, the Muslim woman being in a way the site where all these kind of civilizational energies have been concentrated. There we will save the Muslim woman from its community, and they will be the icon of our national projects of integration and assimilation. But then all of a sudden they start wearing the headscarf, and then but they're in the middle of us, and they have access to all these kind of position. They become teachers, they become lawyers, they become, and so that creates a whole set of paranoias around this, how women become also the kind of signpost and carriers of Muslim radicalism and fundamentalism through the size of their dresses or the size of their headscarves, and so you start to get this figure of the Muslim woman as this as this cunning figure, right? Who is in a way not entirely, who is in a way more dangerous because more access is given to her compared to the man who is excluded. I mean, it is considered like, Muslim men are in general more discriminated also in public space and in jobs than women. But then when these women start not to comply with this figure of the woman who needs to be saved, then it becomes a problem. So, yeah.
Now, both of you talked about the otherization, but maybe I could hone down on the intersectionality between race and religion. How, because Islamophobia is a type of racism that targets Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. So how does intersectionality relate to race and religion, but also with the internal dynamics of Muslims as well in relations to race and religion? And we could add there immigration as the large three elements at work, both in Canada as well as in Europe. So Nuha, if you could think about that question.
Yes, this is like I've been thinking a lot of how because from my experience within the academic spaces, I came to realize that there is an ideal image of the Muslim, like the good Muslim, that is acceptable within these spaces, which is like the tokenism, like the color of, we have Muslims, we have women, we have immigrants, people from the East. I'm not using the term Middle East or putting between brackets, like having all those. That's what they want us to, like. They want our presence, but to a certain limit. There is a certain frame that we cannot get out. And if we think to get out of it, then there is the oppression and the silencing we faced with oppression and silencing and violence. So that's what I term it the good Muslim. If I fit the narrative of a good Muslim according to them, then I am okay. In the minute that I step out of that role and try to express my views, my values, what I believe in, and act based on that, that's when they start to target us, mostly maybe marginalize us, silence us. That was mostly my experience with this.
And Nadia?
I mean, I think it's a mixed kind of reality, and I agree with what you said. But I would also add that I mean, this kind of liberal Islamophobia, as I would call it, is really something that has, in a way, been cultivated in the last, I would say, maybe 20 to 30 years, because there has been this increasing presence and visibility of Muslims in the public sphere, and people have been participating into work life, and you could say that that kind of liberal Islamophobia, in a way, says we are actually welcoming Muslims. I mean, it's not that we are opposed to Muslims. What we think is a problem are really those radical and extremist Muslims. So it's really that what Mamdani calls the good and the bad Muslim is really typical of what you could describe as liberal Islamophobia. But in addition to that, I mean, in Europe, you also have a very good and classic and you could say consistent kind of conservative Islamophobia, which is like, no, I mean, we don't want Islam and is simply a problem. And as long as you don't take a distance from Islam, you will always represent a danger, and you are a kind of a and I think that's where you can see amongst different types of, I mean, we have a very strong far right political presence, whether it's in Germany or in Belgium or in the Netherlands, which are very uncomplexive. I mean, they're very open about seeing. I mean, yeah, seeing Muslims in general as a threat, as a demographic threat, and and I think that element is maybe less visible in the media, but it is not less powerful in the way society is taking shape and the way society is being organized.
Maybe I could extend this the issue of race and religion on this constant discussion about the replacement theory, which really is deeply being activated and mobilized around the racial other, right? When the Ukrainian refugees came, it was seen as the quality refugee. They're like us. So maybe we could think about Islamophobia as it relates to this replacement theory that is being pushed, that's being amplified. And it seems that both the right wing and the liberal Islamophobe have, in essence, represented this discussion about the replacement in almost different ways, but at least epistemologically, both have accepted this grounding of a replacement theory. So I don't know if, Noah, you have seen this in Canada, because there's definitely this replacement theory is being pushed. And then I know the United States, especially also in Europe.
To speak about that in Canada, yes, it was very clear, especially how Canada welcomed, I think we received we issued 1 million visas for Ukrainians and admitted them into the country. And it was very quick process, easy process. They received government support for and incentives, and they were included in workforces, universities, etc. And the paradox, or where I can see how Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian, if I say racism, have really presented itself it was through when the genocide, during the genocide in Gaza, and that Canada agreed, and they were feeling that they're doing a lot, that the government agreed to admit 1,000 Palestinians from Gaza. And there was very difficult conditions where the government decided not to provide any support to this population, only if they have first relatives, family who will provide many documents to prove that they can, of course, support their families for at least a year. So they have to provide all these documents, bank accounts and statements, and it's only the first, relatives, like brothers, sisters, mothers, and children. And the whole program, it was a mess. I worked with several families to assist them from Gaza to, fill the applications. I can say I have, and through my research and through my personal process immigrating to Canada, I know the process. I never saw something complicated like that. Plus, even if imagine they were asking if people have, signs or scars on their body as part of the criteria to accept them to come to Canada or not. So that shows, okay, the Ukrainian is the white, blonde, mostly Christian. So they belong. They felt, or they were treated as if they belong to this society. However, the refugees from Gaza, they were treated as a threat for the security, and they put all these barriers and multi-layers of security to examine them and their files and put all the burden on their families and the people supporting them, but the government didn't do anything. And when just recently I was discussing these issues in one of my classes, and then a student jumped to talk about Sharia law and what does we mean by Sharia law, and I was like, okay, So that also shows you how these connections, how we've been othered, how Muslims been seen as a threat, and of course, and again, maybe if we are here to take over and maybe apply Sharia law, which they don't. Yeah, I told him they should.
You touch on the next question for me after that, but
anyway,
I
so
just want to make I want to make sure that in here the discussion, we're not saying that the Ukrainians should not be treated as refugees, because the 1951 Convention on Refugees gives obligations to the signatories that if a refugee emerges, no matter what their race, background, and so on, and the conflict that they are part of, that they should be actually assisted, brought, and given the transition to come back into normalcy. What we are talking about is the specific double standard that constantly is applied, where one group of refugees are presented as the ideal. They're not the process is made easy, while on the other, Arab, Muslims, Palestinians, global South refugees are constantly problematized. So Nadia, if you could touch on, please, this debate about the replacement theory and how it's actually being utilized to create these barriers.
Yes, I mean, I think the refugee question is an interesting one because there is, of course, also an ambivalent picture when it comes to the refugees in Europe, and that moment was 2014, 2015, when the European Union accepted refugees from the Middle East, and this well-known sentence of Angela Merkel, "Wir schaffen das," and I think what is interesting about that moment is that there was, I mean, it was an exceptional moment. It was a short-lived moment, but it was a moment where people from the Middle East were primarily perceived through their identity as a refugee. And my meaning by refugee, people who are helpless, who are at the mercy of I would say violent dictators. Ayan Kurdi, that image of the small child who is basically dying at the shore, and that Europe needed to show its kind of its kind of benevolent face of this kind of this charitable face of saving and helping helpless people. And that kind of, you could say, worked until another perspective was shown, right? Until the people stopped being a refugee, and of course Colonia, the New Year's eve of 2015, 2016 was a kind of a symbolic turning point when the refugees stopped being refugees, but they became molesters, they became perpetrators. And so it's interesting because you see how easily you can switch from one to the others, from the helpless kind of victim to the aggressor, basically. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh my God, what did we do? Whom did we allow in? And so it really flips very quickly. And I think it also shows something about how this kind of European whiteness also works, because whiteness is also achieved through this capacity to help. I mean, that's also an important characteristic of how whiteness makes itself potent and operates by being able to extend its sense of help, because that's also how it gains a sense of conscience, of being on the right side of history, of superiority through its capacity. It's this kind of Christian charity, if you want, right? Its capacity to be able to save the other, but that can very quickly change. And I think that mechanism of, on the one hand, helping and at the same time feeling needing to put borders and barriers are always working at the same time. And you see it also with Muslim women, right? We need to save Muslim women, but at the same time, all these men, we need to protect ourselves from it. And I think that's why it's, I mean, if you speak to refugees who have come, Syrian, African, there is always this moment of disenchantment also. I mean, I belong to an older generation of migrants, and I also study, of course, these questions. And I'm waiting, when will the disenchantment happen, right? Because there is always this first moment of people arriving and being the good migrants. And that was certainly the case for Syrians and Palestinians, many of them also being artists and, fighting for democracy and seeing Europe as a kind of safe space. And then things turn, and then there is this moment of disenchantment, like, oh, okay, so it's not what we thought it would be. And to come back to the Ukrainians, of course, Ukrainians are altogether a very different category, because there is a geopolitical interest of Europe in the ongoing war, because it's also a European war, and Europe is at war with Russia. So there is a very different relationship to it. But it was also interesting to see how the open arms that were there towards the Ukrainians at some point also came to an end. So of course, Ukrainians had a special kind of treatment. They didn't have to go through the classical procedure for applying for refugee status. It was given to them immediately. There were all these hotspots that were created for them. But you could also notice it amongst families who were hosting Ukrainians, and the kind of hospitality that was granted to them also is coming to an end. We also should not forget that Ukrainians are also not entirely white. Europeans' whiteness is also a fractured one. There is also what some scholars are calling a peripheral whiteness, and Eastern Europeans also very much part of that. So I think that's also something that should not completely be forgotten. But of course, it's also a very different story than the story of the Syrian refugees.
Now, Noah, you began to talk about the deployment of the anti-Sharia discourse, and we're seeing this. We saw it in Zahran Mamdani's campaign in New York. We see it almost on a daily basis nationally. We see it in Canada with the right wing deploying this, in Europe, whether it's France, UK. So how is that driver? What does the introduction of this anti-Sharia cloud, what does it do both for the Muslims on the one hand, but also in driving Islamophobia as a distinct discourse focusing on this anti-Sharia campaign?
Yeah, like I always thought of in terms of, as I mentioned, the case in when a student just right away when we're talking about this jumping to Sharia law, which is being used as like, you know, this is scary. This is something inhumane. It's oppressive. And the first, like, I replied by a question in terms like, what do you know about Sharia law? And the answer they do like they like almost nothing, and the only examples that they were successful to bring in the stoning of women and you know the covering of women, and I like again it's the issue of reducing a whole culture, a whole religion of 2 billion people into just one aspect that maybe I don't want to go to the argument because I read Quran and didn't see stoning in Quran. And but that's what they use, you know, to present Islam as I think even with the Sharia law, they moved a little bit from September 11th and maybe terrorists more focusing on these everyday life actions, everyday life, and how Islam is applied and the different interpretations of Islam. So in my experience, that's how it's been used. And how it's becoming really is for these especially young generation who like mostly talking about the students that I interact with, that they don't know, and they just use flashy examples that's been centered in order like create a picture of Islam as a dangerous, radical, backward religion, and seeing us as like when we represent Islam, like for me as a woman in academia, as how I represent it, as I am just one example. I'm not the norm. I'm the exception in terms of representing what Islam is, but the norm that it's again about Islam being a violent, a religion of violence and backward religion, and politicizing that for, to put, restrictions on Muslims, to othering Muslims, and what, like, I will refer also to what Nadia said about, saying that, seeing themselves as the saviors, that they are trying to educate us and teach us and to be part of their narrative. And if we dare to challenge that, then again, as I said, we are silenced. That's what, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Nadia, how does this anti-Sharia campaigns fits into the European discourse, and how it's actually utilized to create the other in civil society or structurally?
I mean, I think it maps quite differently in the European context, because there are no equivalent. I mean, like in Canada, because there are like some kind of Sharia compliant councils or whatever it is you call them. I don't know how you call them exactly in Canada. I mean, there is no equivalent phenomenon in the European context. It's just European law. So to the extent that there is any Sharia, it's really in the fantasy of the Europeans. I mean, the UK notwithstanding, I mean, there is some presence there, but in very minor ways. And so to the extent that it's being applied or used, it's really in the Islamophobic kind of fantasies of Muslims wanting to introduce the Sharia, or wanting to support the Sharia, or being in favor of the Sharia. So it comes occasionally through surveys. So that's where you see it. Occasionally there are some social scientists or public opinion surveys that are being done amongst Muslims and their viewpoints on the Sharia, and then there is like a whole flash news: Muslims support the Sharia, panic, and so it's more that kind of of discourse that circulates, but it's not as organized, I would say, as in the US, where you really have like bills, anti-Sharia bills that are being voted upon, or in Canada, where it's really like it's a notion around which people can lobby or organize. In average, I would say that the common perception of people around the Sharia is a very negative one. It's about stoning, it's hand cutting, it's women who are turned into slaves. So I would say that's the kind of general public perception that people would have around it. But it fits all the Orientalist tropes, right? And it's part of the common kind of Orientalist / Islamophobic tropes that circulate around this issue. So if you say as a Muslim, I am in favor of the Sharia, then people, of course, are shocked because they immediately think of women stoning stoning or hand cutting. And then we always have to spend time explaining what it can mean. But it's oftentimes seen as something foreign, it's something far away, it's not something that is... where it becomes more concrete is oftentimes you will see in TV shows where people are asked about the relationship between the Constitution and the Quran, but then it comes back to this question of double loyalty. And that's a more, I would say, insidious and vicious kind of theme that oftentimes circulates around personalities or people who want to have access to, high profile Muslims who will be asked about their relationship to the Belgian Constitution, or who will be, I think that's a more powerful and pernicious kind of theme. That's the idea of the Muslim Brotherhood, that people are accused of having ties or being connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, that also operates as a kind of a trope to incriminate and to block, you could say, access to specific elite positions or positions of influence. And that's quite recurrently used against high-profile Muslims.
Now, maybe I want to ask a question about ongoing research about Islamophobia. If both Nuha and Nadia, what type of research that you are doing, what type of gaps in the research on Islamophobia that you think you could encourage people to partake? The field is actually developing, and we're hoping as many graduate students, as many people can interest it. So what research right now you're doing, not that you publish or perish, but what type of research that is underway? And then maybe we could talk about the gaps that we see, that nobody's picking these gaps in the Islamophobia research field.
Like, to speak about my research, I'm not directly like focusing on Islamophobia, but it always emerged as a theme within the work that I do. As I mentioned at the beginning, I did lots of research about spatial justice and the deliberate home destruction within, like in Palestine, then moving to look into dismantling the structures of oppression within the academic institutions and hopefully creating spaces that like of real inclusion and belonging. So I work on like several projects related to that. One of them is looking at equity, diversity, inclusion within the classroom, and how instructors, usually we talk about these as performative and not really action. So like in our profession, social work, we are a profession in social work. We lean more to what should we do, how things should be addressed in reality, not like a lot of focus and theorizing, but like how to address recent issues. So in that, we worked in developing certain, like a tool that support instructors within the classroom to apply equity, diversity, inclusion. And part of it, of course, we look at we ask them to look at their values and beliefs, etc. So that's one aspect, that how to create more inclusive spaces, including spaces that welcome Muslims with them, not in a performative way, but in a way that really engage them within these spaces. And of course, in the shadow of the genocide in Gaza, I couldn't and seeing the silencing of Palestinians and their supporters, and also the bias you see in terms of focusing mostly on performance and decontextualizing grief, and allows also institutions to allow that they are caring, but at the same time they are doing nothing substantive. So that encouraged me with other colleagues to start working on 2 projects. One of them now, in which we came together as scholars to look how we function within these spaces that as I said, decontextualize grief, and again center the feeling of the white instead of focusing on action. So we looked at the experience, how academics experience and experience genocide within these spaces, how it's impacted them, and what kind of support they received. And there were to focus on Islamophobia, where it's emerged to say that that we want your Muslimness within the faculty or within the academia. However, we do not. Again, you have a certain limit where that you cannot exceed. So we want the presence of your Muslimness, but when it comes to action, there's no action. And now we are moving also to work at to look at students, how that with the encampments and how students being treated and the violence toward them, the ongoing violence. Now we are looking where we are studying the experiences also of silencing of students during the genocide, and how their identity, who they are as students, impact that experience within these spaces, and the kind of support that they get from these institutions, and how the policies about EDI that's been celebrated all the time, how it's applied when the part that's been impacted is Muslims, Arabs, and Palestinians. So we are arguing that it's not separated, anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim racism is not separated, and it's connected, and it's formed the base how the students and faculty at the same time are experiencing violence during the genocide, and it's ongoing, unfortunately. So these are mostly what we are, me and my colleagues looking at.
Thank you. Nadia?
So I think when it comes to me, so I've been working on the question of the security state and how the latter has been reinforced, and especially in the European context, how the Muslim question and Islamophobia have figured as an important impetus in the development and you could say the further strengthening, not development, but further strengthening and reconfiguration of the European security state. And I think that remains a very important question, and even more vital one, and now with Gaza and ongoing genocide, on how the figure of the Muslim extremists, the Muslim terrorist, Hamas and what have you, are, you could say, the site around which a further militarization is entrenched, and different kinds of connections between different state actors are fortified. So I think that will remain an important question, and I don't think there can be enough research on that. Um, I do think that, and speaking for myself, I think these are also questions that I want to explore more and more in the years to come, is really to also look at how the whole context and climate of Islamophobia is really reshaping and refashioning the conditions of what it means to be a Muslim today. And in different ways. On the one hand, of course, we have all the studies around the ways in which Muslim can assert and express their Muslimness in public life, but also the internal debates. How is the Islamic tradition being reconfigured in light of the Islamophobic context, for better or for worse? What kind of debates are possible or rendered impossible? How are certain questions being revisited? For instance, the idea of Europe as a hospitable environment is being reviewed as by younger generations of Muslims who say, well, no, Europe is no longer a space of settlement for Muslims, and we need to leave Europe, and we need to think of other ways of other places to live. So this is also an important line of study that more and more people are looking into, that we have started working on a few years ago. But it's really this reconfiguration of Europe, and Europe that is no longer considered a space that is desirable for Muslims to be in, which was different from when I started working on my PhD, because Europe was very much seen as a place where Muslims could actually thrive and flourish. So I think that's also something that I think is an important question, because it points also towards a broader geopolitical reconfiguration that I think is also important to keep in mind, on how Islamophobia is also altering the desirability of Europe. And I think it's not just negative, right? It's also positive, because through that people are also exploring different horizons, are also recentering and decentering Europe through that. So I think all of that is also interesting to look at the unintended effects of Islamophobia, and all of a sudden it becomes less attractive, right? Also for investment and for you could say all kinds of developments. And then I would say lastly is also to think about Islamophobia in the peripheries, non-white Islamophobia, you could say, in the global south. And I think those are really important developments, because we often tend to center it around Euro-American context, but of course India, Africa, or Christian Zionism, for instance, is a very important power of and vector of Islamophobia. And I think those are also questions we should continue to look at.
Good. Now, for my last question, I wanted to say, where can we see some of the work in an intersectional way to push against Islamophobia? Are there some success stories, some sites where we see this, alliances that are forming? I'm thinking of possibly elections in France that brought some configuration, maybe some of the elections and work in the UK, possibly in Belgium, the alliances, maybe Black Muslim alliances, maybe cultural spaces that are beginning to produce art in challenge. So where do you see some of this intersectional alliances for activism, for pushing back? And is that a hopeful space? And how can we invest in that?
I mean, if I speak of continental Europe, I think the UK is quite different in that regard. I mean, I would say that Islamophobia is still a site of fracturing, and I think, for instance, of the security state, the political mobilization around it is very, very limited compared to what you see in the US or in the UK. Now it's starting to change a little bit, because it's coming to bite at left-wing movements. Now, I mean, this is also the reason we have strikes, because people are realizing all this war economy that is costing to the social security and the austerity measures that are happening. And I think, and also instruments that were forged to target Muslim organizations are now also being used to target left-wing organizations. And so I think people need to feel it before they realize, like, oh, maybe we should also do. And I think people are starting now to see it and to feel it. So And of course, Gaza and the ongoing genocide was also an important eye-opener for many people, that they realize, like, yeah, how the specter of terrorism is being used to dehumanize people and to allow for far-reaching acts of violence. So I hope that we are in a turning point, and that conversations that were impossible 5 years ago, and where people are like, no, no, it's because people are doing something wrong, right? And there is no fire, there is no smoke without fire, and so we stay away from it. And that kind of attitude will somehow lessen, so that we can really create bridges, because we haven't had so many bridges, I would say, for continental Europe compared to the US and the UK, where of course the security state has been much more violent and much more present than it was the case in continental Europe. We've had other issues, laïcité, discrimination, but not that kind of military presence. And I think now we're starting to see more and more of that. And my hope is that it will also allow for more intersectional alliances.
Nuha?
Okay, thank you. To speak to that, I will take it to to radical refusals and resistance. Like, what I mean by that, like, not like in terms of it's being theoretical, but looking at resistance as it's embodied in like everywhere, like the students, for example, encampments, or to speak like from the Canadian context and from a social work perspective, like students encampments, the faculty voting, for example, to divest, the grassroots groups like the social workers for Palestine and the indigenous and Black communities, they are all standing in solidarity, and they work together to resist the oppression against, specifically within like this time, against like Muslims, Palestinians, Arabs on campuses. So I can speak into that. And these usually ethics, like the ethics of resistance, solidarity, is part of our work, community organizing, and like the ethics of social work as a profession. So what I can say about also, so I can articulate, or we started to do that now in our publication that still didn't come out yet, where we articulate a call for action and resistance through the concept of istinhad, which is the Arabic word, which is we call for awakening and rise and mobilize, which is a praxis that's rooted in the Palestinian epistemology of Sumud. So that's how I see how we can respond to all of this, and start working together as a collective in our refusal to, first of all, to remain passive, and in our demand for action, and in aligning also with different groups that are facing similar kind of oppression, and work together, in order to face this reality that we are in today. So mostly, yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any reading recommendation for our audience, whether books, materials you wrote, or something you recommend to both Nuha and Nadia? We could put it also in the YouTube channel for people to access. So if you have anything that you could recommend top of your head you wrote, or something you recommend from others.
I'm always very bad at thinking of books out of the top of my head.
Your own books, that would be, you could remember those for sure, right?
Yes.
Or after we
Yeah.
publish it, that's it, I don't want to look at it.
Yeah. I mean, then you need to do self-promotion, which we are also, I think, very bad. We're very shy.
I'm very cognizant. It's very important for us to promote individuals, scholars that are doing work on you're already marginalized in the norm of Western academia and so on. So if we don't promote our scholars and the contribution, then we're not actually building the field collectively. So I definitely want people to promote the material as the solid base for research.
Yes. Yeah.
So if not, I'll make sure that Omar will actually put your works on the YouTube and for people to
Thank you.
access the material. We have collectively to work to building the Islamophobia studies
Thank
field.
you.
Thank you, Nadia and Nuha, for sharing your powerful insight and lived experiences. Today's conversation affirmed a crucial truth. Islamophobia is never a single story. It's never a single geography. It's not a single individual articulation. It is a layered, interconnected, and deeply embedded within broader system of racialization, sexism, xenophobia, class inequality, and colonial legacies. Resistance also is intersectional. We have to collectively resist as a mode of standing. Grassroots organizing, community care, and solidarity movement continue to create spaces of empowerment and collective healing. To our audience, which I see there are quite a large number of people tuned in, close to 400. So thank you for being with us. To our audience, thank you for joining us. We encourage you to support local organizing, amplify marginalized voices, and push back against amplified narratives, because justice demands complexity and demands commitment. Until next time, this is the Islamophobia Files. Thank you for being with us, and Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.
Okay.